Hi there, and welcome to Backstage with Speaking Your Brand. I'm your host, Carol Cox, founder and CEO of Speaking Your Brand. Backstage is our LinkedIn live show where we take you behind the scenes to talk about what we do here at Speaking Your Brand, how we work with our clients. And in this case, we're talking about thought leadership, and in particular, how your personal story and personal experiences interplay with your thought leadership message and actually are a critical component of your thought leadership. Joining me today, we have three of our current Thought Leader Academy clients, Terese Bottner, Betty Graham, and Cherie Mylordis. And they're going to be talking about their own thought leadership messages and how their personal experiences have impacted why it is that they want to talk about the topic that they do. So we would love to take your questions along the way. So if you're live here watching us or watching the replay, say hi to us in the chat. Also, feel free to ask questions as we go. Hi, Diane. Nice to see you in the chat. Yes, of course, Diane Diaz is our lead speaking coach and has worked with all of you as well in our group calls. Let's do a round of introductions, and then we will dive into our questions. Terese, can you tell us what it is that you do in your work? And we'll pause there, and then we'll come back to your thought leadership.
Okay. Hi, I'm Terese, and I am a presentation coach. I'm also a youth mentor for teenagers, and so that's what I do.
Okay, fantastic, Terese. And Cherie?
Hi, I'm Cherie. I'm in Sydney, Australia. I work with clients around the world in business transformation, innovation, leadership, and culture.
Wonderful. And Cherie is on the Speaking Your Brand podcast this week, the episode that came out, and she talks about some of the clients and case studies that she is using in her signature talk, and they really are so inspirational. So make sure to check out that episode if you haven't already. And then we have Betty Graham joining us also today. Betty, tell us what you do.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for having me. My name is Betty Graham. I have been working for Fairway Independent Mortgage for the past 14 years. I'm our Chief Strategy and Business Development Officer.
Fantastic. So as you see, we have a variety of different industries and different types of women entrepreneurs and leaders here. That's one thing I really like about the Thought Leader Academy is that we do bring together women from across industries and across roles and positions, which makes it a nice blend for y'all to give feedback to each other. As I mentioned at the top, we're going to be talking about thought leadership, and thought leadership is more than your expertise. Your expertise is the foundation for your thought leadership, but then there's so much more that goes on top of it. Thought leadership is really about what is your unique angle and perspective in your area of expertise in your industry. What's the thing that you feel like could be better or could be changed? There's something about the status quo that you feel needs to be changed in order to benefit more people. And what I have found is that this unique angle, this perspective that you have in your area of expertise really comes from your own personal experiences that have shaped what you've learned and what matters to you. And it's these personal stories that also make your thought leadership message in your talks so much more interesting and memorable for your audience. So if we think about the layers of thought leadership, 4 layers of thought leadership, you have your expertise, and then you have your big idea. So that angle that you have on your expertise, and then you have your personal story, and then the emotional courage to dig deep and to share it. Let me do a round robin here and have each of you share big picture. What is your thought leadership message? What is it that you want to see changed in your industry, or what message do you want to impart to your audiences? Cherie, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I'm really passionate about progressive organizations that really inspire and empower their people, because I've been following companies around the world that do work in this more progressive way, and they achieve really amazing things, not just for their people, but for their business, for their customers, for everyone. And yet I find that a lot of organizations do seem to be stuck in outdated ways. So I'm really on a mission to help people understand that there are more progressive ways, more contemporary ways to work, and for them to have that awareness that, there are ways to tap into your own personal purpose and an organization's purpose and really bring out the best in you and the way you work to achieve these extraordinary things. So I also think that with the pandemic, we're in a moment in time where, as we're rethinking how we work, we can really draw from some of these examples and bring those into the organizations where we work.
I remember, Cherie, when we were working together on your signature talk, and I have it here. I have your signature talk canvas board with all of your Post-it notes, and I have this little visual that I drew here in the contrast between the old way of working versus the new way of working. And this is a good, for those of you watching or listening, it's a good frame to think about potentially for your thought leadership message in your talk. Is there an old way versus a new way? And I know, Cherie, that for you, you really see, us, the years in the pandemic and coming out of that as an opportunity to adopt a new way of working versus kind of settling back on the old, well-worn path.
Yes, I do. That's right. And we were talking a lot about shapes when we created my board. We were talking about the triangle or the pyramid structure. We were talking about, networking and using circles. And even we can invert that pyramid, because if the leaders are at the bottom of the pyramid and serving their people, that changes the dynamic of how people work.
Yes. And I can't wait to dive into some of your personal experiences that have led you to this new understanding. Before we get there, let me have Terese share her thought leadership message.
Hi, so my thought leadership message is about communicating more effectively with teenagers. The opportunity here, kind of the old and the new, it feels like some parents get the memo just intuitively of how to communicate with their kids. And some of us just wing it, and we either fall flat big time or somehow we get lucky and our teens turn out okay. And that was my case. I think I was just somehow my kids ended up okay. But since I am a communication coach, my thought leadership talk is about communicating with teens more effectively, and really I tap into the energy of communication and how that works. So yeah, so I'm excited. I think it'll be helpful for parents and teachers. There's a couple of different audiences that I can shift it around for. So yeah.
All right. And Betty, how about you? Share with us your thought leadership message.
Yeah. So Carol, years ago, I had a mentor say to me, it's until I've worked myself out as a job as a leader, I've not really done my job. And really what that means is it's our responsibility as leaders to bring our people up with us, right? To join us in this adventure of whatever role we're playing in our industry. And that really is for them to have space to grow and to become the next generation of leaders. And so it changed my perspective on every time I try to make a decision now as a leader am I doing it for the good of others? It's not about the good for me and to prove who I am. It's about bringing up that next group and to give them the space to be the best they can be. That's when I feel like I've really done my job as a leader, when I've worked myself out of a job. So that's been my whole focus. That was a game changer for me, probably years, I don't know, I was probably in my mid-30s when that was said to me, and it totally affected how I look at things.
That is really powerful, Betty. I remember when we were working on your board together, and I have yours here, and I was asking you to share some things that you remember, some experience you've had, at jobs in your industry and what has stood out to you. And when you said that to me, that mentor had said, my job is to work myself out of my job. I was like, oh, that's it. Like ding, ding, ding. Right. Yeah. Like this is what now, like if we take that as the theme, like what it is that you want to impart to your audiences, and then think about what are those, like, how do we get there? What are the things to do, the lessons that you've learned along the way to help your audience get to that point? All right. So let's talk about then your personal stories and personal experiences, because that really is what shapes thought leadership. If we wanted to go deliver a presentation about, do these three tactics or these three strategies to achieve success in this domain or in this industry, we can all do that. And there's a time and a place for that. But I truly believe that it's your personal stories, personal experiences that infuse your thought leadership with you, right? And that's what makes you then a valued and in-demand speaker and presenter and content creator, is because it's about you. So Cherie, let me go to you, and let's talk about, when you think about the signature talk that you've been working on, want to pick one of your own personal stories from it? Tell us a little bit about that story and how it relates to the thought leadership message.
Sure, Carol. And it really wasn't until we were talking through my storyboard that it really became clear to me that I had been working in quite an extraordinary way many years ago, and that was a contrast to how I'd been working in recent years. And so really, before the Sydney Olympics, I joined the Sydney Olympics organising committee 5 years out, and we had an enormous task to put on this extraordinary event, and we had a fixed deadline and very high standards. And I had never worked on an Olympic Games before. I had never been to an Olympic Games before, and that was the case for most of my colleagues. And so we had to radically, think differently. We had to collaborate. We had to draw on all of our instincts and obviously learn as much as we could from other games. But it dawned on me that we had actually embodied many of the characteristics that I see in some of these extraordinary organizations today, which is all about having a very clear and inspirational purpose. Well, we had that. There's nothing probably a lot more purposeful than an Olympic Games. You're bringing the world together in peace. So we had that. And then it was about that working together to achieve that goal and working in an iterative way and experimenting, but making sure that we delivered the outcome. So yeah, it really dawned on me in our conversations that those were the key traits that I had been searching for in my career and in my work journey, and probably why there was such a disconnect in what I was seeing in these case studies I was following versus what I was living in the corporate world up until a few years ago.
And Cherie, your story is, I feel, very emblematic of so many of the women that I talk to and work with and that we work with, is because that thread of your thought leadership really stretches back. I mean, think about it, 25 years, because the Sydney Olympics took place in 2000. Of course, you had spent the 5 years prior to that getting it ready. And so if you think about, for so many of us, the work that we do today, what matters to us, even though it may look very different than the work we were doing 10 or 20 or 25 years ago, that thread is probably still there as far as what do we naturally want to do then? How do we naturally want to work or show up? And then how does that still the case today? All right.
Absolutely.
So let's go
I think there's, sorry if I can just add to that.
Yes.
I think there's defining moments in our career, and they can be really positive defining moments, or they can be negative defining moments. But I think they stick with us, and I think they shape our thought leadership and what we really care about.
Yes, absolutely. And then Betty, obviously that was very much the case for you, having this mentor when he said that to you. And then I know that there were other things along the way in your career that made an impact.
Yeah, I would say one of the ones that comes top to mind for me, and it's actually in part of my my board that we did, which is I had brought on a leader to kind of take over the operations because I needed to move into that next role in order to help take our company to the next level, right? And she came on board. She was great, and I still get embarrassed when I say this, but it's reality. I kicked her butt constantly. Like I constantly was hard on her, constantly, I didn't give her opportunity to be her. And it wasn't until I stepped out, I had to take myself completely out of this situation. And then it wasn't until then that I realized, oh my God, because she's not doing it my way, she's not doing it the right way in my eyes, right? And the reality is, she's so much better at it than I was. And it wasn't until I stepped from it to realize I actually had to go back and apologize to her because I did not realize how hard I was on her until I took myself out of the situation. So that was a very humbling experience as a leader to recognize how hard I was being on her because she wasn't doing it my way when her way was better.
And Betty, and thank you for sharing that here, but also in your talk, because this is that emotional courage layer that's at the very top of thought leadership, where it's not fun to share stories that, could be embarrassing or we feel like, oh, I wish I had done it another way at the time looking back, but those are where all the learnings come from.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. And Terese, what about you? Do you have what's a personal story or personal experience that you can share that's related to your thought leadership message about teenagers?
Okay. Well, first of all, Betty, I have so many of those. Good for you. You're a brave woman. Yeah, those are definitely the really great learning experiences. So I hearken back to when I was 13. My mom was one of my mentors, and like so many of us, our mothers had a big impact on us. And one morning I woke up and she was baking a cake, and I was all excited because I get up and I'm like, woo, and it was a pineapple upside down cake. And she was just really focused. She's just like, this isn't for us. We're taking it to a family. And she had heard on the news that morning on the radio that there was a family not too far, about a half an hour away from us, actually in a nicer neighborhood. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, and the house was in a more rural area, and a Black family had just moved in, and somebody burned a cross in front of their front lawn. They had just moved in. And so my mom just heard about this on the radio, and we are taking this pineapple upside down cake to this family. And I don't remember how, but we all, I'm from a big family. So about 3 of us girls hopped in the car and went with my mom, drove about a half hour away and dropped this cake off with a note. I think she just dropped it off at the front, I don't remember seeing the people or anything, but it had such an impact on me, had an impact that we're all responsible for each other. And, my mom felt an apology was necessary, like, you belong. We're sorry this happened. You belong. We're supporting you. And so I think that's where, my parents were always very service oriented. So my passion with working with underserved and at-risk youth is why I do what I do, and I always hear her in the back of my head saying, go fight, get, whatever you have something to give. No matter how little you have something to offer. So that's why I think I'm passionate about this signature talk. I work with corporate leadership too, but this is my passion. This is what, I really feel the world needs is just all of us to, help where we can.
Yes, Terese. Well, thank you for sharing that story. Really powerful. And obviously, I can see how much of the activism work that you do today clearly came from growing up and having a mom like you did as a role model for that. And so I'll stick with Terese here, and then we'll go back to Cherie and Betty. So Terese, I see that you have your board behind you there with the Post-it notes. And I know you and Diane had worked together on your signature talk. So if we think about either that story or some of the other stories that you have, can you share like where in the Act 1, Act 2, or Act 3, where is that story showing up?
Well, actually, I am working that in, and it hasn't, but it's probably going to show up in the middle, because I start out with kind of, Betty, you will appreciate this. I start out with that there's a 17-year-old cheerleader driving in the back of a car. She's in the back seat, and it's a dark winter night, and she's with her friends, and they were driving to an away basketball game. Drinking cheap wine out of a bottle and eating White Castle sliders and feeling pretty good about ourselves. And one of my very when I tell the story, I don't reveal it's me, but it is me. And one of my very fun friends shows me how to lean out of the car and toss an empty bottle into a speed limit sign. And, in the stories, and like, she's thrilled, right? So it comes back, I reveal that 17-year-old cheerleader was me, and we don't always like our kids. So that's here, sometimes you don't even like your kids. You take a bullet for them, but you're wondering, where did this creature come from? Like, did they not listen to anything I said? Like, you just heard who my mother was, right? She's like Mother Teresa. So like, here's me, like, woo, like throwing a wine bottle and it's splattering all over, like, and then I use that story to say, I was thrilled for about 2 minutes. And then the guilt came in. And then the realization, like, if my mom ever found out, if my parents ever found out I did this, oh my gosh, they'd be so ashamed, so disappointed. So I don't, the teenager doesn't stay there because she's been modeled. She's had parents and mentors that modeled for her. So you, even though you make stupid choices, you don't stay there. So that's kind of how I use that and talk about, and I'm still trying to figure out where to fit the first story in. So.
Oh, well, I like that, Terese, and how you don't reveal that it was you until later on. It definitely captivates. Like, I want to hear more. And doesn't Terese do a great job of setting us into the scene? With a dark night, drinking and eating the whites, and all that. So that was really well done. All right, so let's go to Betty. So Betty, can you talk to us a little bit about with your board? Where are you putting in some of your stories?
I believe it's in Act 2.
Mm-hmm.
That's where majority of my stories are. I think at the end, I also put in a couple of stories, but I'd say majority of it's Act 2.
Yes. And then the way we kind of set up your content is you have like these 3 lessons that you're sharing with the audience for this idea of working yourself out of your job is your job.
Yeah.
And can you share how you describe yourself? Because when you told me this, like, we had to include it.
Yeah, I always describe myself, and have for years. I say I go through life with a little bit of class, a little bit of sass, and a little badass. And yeah, because I always feel like, when you work hard, you play hard, you have to have a little bit of fun with it. So that's where that came from.
And so then what? So this is what happens when, I'm working with someone, is like, they tell me these things and they seem just like kind of like one-offs or tangents or kind of like not that relevant. But I'm like listening for these things. I'm like, oh, that's we can use that as your framework for your lesson. So we have her first lesson is like basically class, sass, and badass are like these 3 lessons that is like the setup for those. So that's so fun. All right. And then Cherie, what about you? Where do some of your stories fit in?
So in Act 1, we talked about a tale of 2 roles. So really that experience I just talked about with the Olympics, and then what happened a few years ago where I just got to a point where I was so frustrated that leaders didn't want to listen to, new ways, and they were blaming the busyness of just the corporate world. And I just felt frustrated for quite some time. And so finally I decided to step out of the corporate world and work with leaders from the outside. And so that's really my opening story, is that tale of 2 roles. And then in Act 2, I have a framework. So I have my Dare, Ditch and Dial framework, and I have a story or a case study that relates to each of the Ds. And so 2 of those are clients that I've worked with, and 1 is an inspiring organization that I've been following for years. So that's how I build in those stories. And really bringing that together is that the common thread that brings all of that together is that leaders have a choice. And so with each of those stories, it comes down to that choice. And really about the whole talk is about a choice, about the fact that I believe we've reached a signpost in the evolution of work. And so it's tying together that thread of the choice and then bringing the choice back to the audience at the end to say, you have a choice too. So that's how it works.
Great. And again, for those of you watching and listening, you can hear that the stories are good, number one, to have that sense of relatability with them all as the speaker, as the presenter, as they're sharing, that not only that they have a personal investment in this topic, in this message that they're sharing, but also it gives a sense of validation to the audience that as the speaker, they've been there too. They've been in that place where they messed up. Or something didn't go the way that they had anticipated, and what did they learn? And I know that for myself in the audience, if a speaker shares is where, things did not go well and what they learned from it. I so much more relate to that than someone who pretends that everything has always been easy or perfect or seamless, because we know that does not happen in real life at all.
No.
And the other thing is to mention is that, we have this framework, right? This story structure framework that we've been using for years. And it's great because it provides this guide to to flowing your content from the beginning to the end. But as you can hear, the beauty of it is so flexible. So you can start with a story, you can start with an audience question, you can put that key story at the beginning in Act 1, you can put it in the middle of Act 2, you could put it in the end of Act 3. So it's all fluid based on what makes the most sense for you as a speaker, for that audience want to deliver to them. All right, so let me ask you all, since you're all currently in the Thought Leader Academy, you're going to be graduating on March 7th, so you're coming up, not too far away. Why did you decide to join the Thought Leader Academy, and what has been the experience so far? Cherie, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I was just looking for podcasts, actually, by women to really elevate my speaking. I've got a lot of experience in presenting and facilitating and leading training. And I've done some speaking over the last few years at conferences, and it's just something I want to get better at. And so I discovered your Speaking Your Brand podcast, and I had been listening to it for quite some months. And then you kept talking about this Thought Leader Academy. And so I reached out to you and we explored it, and I was a little concerned it might not work for me because it was a crazy time, because I'm based in Sydney, Australia, but I'm really proud to say that I've showed up for every group session. And yeah, I really, and the time frame is more friendly now. It's at 7 a.m. instead of 5 or 6 a.m. So yeah, I just was inspired. I felt like I knew you already by listening to all of the podcasts. Yeah. And so it was just a logical transition to then join the community. It's been great.
And what has stood out to you the most about your time so far in the Academy?
I think it is that community. It's, everyone shows up and everyone gives each other feedback. So you feel like you're in this really supportive cohort, and we're all trying to make a difference in the world in our own way, shaped by our own experiences and what we're passionate about. So that has been a really key element for me. And also it's just the framework and all the structure and all the tips and techniques that you bring. It's a really robust framework. And there's just so much richness in what you cover every week. And there's always a theme. So it's very well organized, and there's a really good flow that helps you think through all the different aspects, not just in creating your talk, but how do you go about pitching to, agencies or conferences if you're interested in speaking, and all the other things that go around that. So it's quite a holistic approach, this program.
Oh, thank you. That was the plan. So glad to hear that's coming through. All right. What about you, Betty? Yeah. Why did you decide to join, and what has been the experience for you?
So similar to Cherie, I was listening to your podcast, and the truth is I don't think I realized, I used to speak in front of our organization. We have about 11,000 employees, had about 11,000 employees. Obviously that's changed a little bit recently, but I didn't realize how much COVID had affected me, in the sense that I kind of became, I'm the least thing to an introvert, but I felt like I had become a little bit of an introvert, in the sense that I didn't feel comfortable anymore on stage. And like Cherie, I felt like I needed some structure. It was overwhelming almost when I would think about speaking again. And so after listening to your podcast several times, I did the same thing. I joined, and you said it earlier, when I may be going off on a tangent, somewhere you find structure in that. And so that was a real aha moment for me as you and I worked through the board together. And I think what I take away from it is, yes, community. Most of all, and we hear this all the time, but it's so funny. You think it's cliche until you in that situation. You're not alone, right? I'm not alone with not having the comfort of how to put a speech together or to get up on stage. So that was pivotal. And yes, you simplified that process and made it to where I actually feel comfortable and think that I could go out there and deliver it and not be overwhelmed.
Oh, well, I'm so glad to hear that. Yes, that's our mission, right? To help women find and use their voices out into the
That's right.
world. Oh, and Terese, what about you? Why did you
Yeah.
decide to join the academy, and what has your experience been?
Yeah, everything Betty and Cherie said is I feel the same way. In coming off of COVID, I had not presented in person in so long, and I'm somebody who teaches how to, do presentations, and so really kind of lost my mojo, and I also work for myself, and so it's isolating, and you don't
Yeah.
have people to give you feedback. So this has been incredible. I found you also through your podcast, and I was like, man, she really speaks to me. She just seems like somebody that I would connect with, and it has been that way. And I worked specifically with Diane, and she's the same way. She's just so easy to work with, and you feel so supportive. Then the group sessions have been so uh, collaborative and supportive feeling. And I'm just, even if I haven't specifically talked to anybody, I'm just like, I get so much from everybody else's experiences and shares. I even had one of the ladies in the group, and we connected on another subject to help her with her signature speech. And it was just so nice. And I feel like I can reach out to just about anybody in the group and
Yeah.
get some support, right? I mean, it's just fun. It's like watching Cherie, your interview last week. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was so good. I gained so much from it. And
Oh.
each one of the women in the group, it's just really a powerful group of women.
Yes, indeed it is. It inspires me every single week. You all inspire me every single week. I want to do some shout outs here to some women in the chat. We have Nicole Rochester, who is going to be at our in-person client retreat next week, along with Terese, joining us in Orlando, Florida for our 3 days of speaking practice and filming. Can't wait for that. Hi, Nicole. Thank you for being here. Melissa Allman, hi. Thank you for being here. Yes, you can catch the replay as soon as the live is done. That's the beauty of LinkedIn Live. The video is going to be there at the same link, so you can go back and watch from the beginning. All right. So thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for those of you who have been live in the chat. Please make sure to connect with Terese, Cherie, and Betty on LinkedIn so that you can follow them. And if you have any questions, obviously stick them in the comments here, either live or in the replay, and we will be happy to answer them. Terese, Cherie, and Betty, thank you so much for coming on Backstage with Speaking Your Brand, sharing about your thought leadership message and your personal stories. And also thank you so much for being such valued members of the Thought Leader Academy and for Speaking Your Brand. If you all listening would like to find more information about the Thought Leader Academy, our next enrollment date is March 14th. So we're coming up pretty soon. All the details are at speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/academy. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having us, Carol.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.